Hi, I'm Sasan with Proteus Debate Academy. We are not an academy, we are a YouTube channel that aims to bring high quality resources to coaches and current competitors of any debate format that wants to reach out to us and let us know how we can help. A lot of the times that's been round analysis videos. That's what we're going to do today. Most of the content that we've put on our channel has been public forum oriented, but not because either of us did public forum. We've coached it a little bit, but most of the most of the people doing debate, or at least in the forums that we've been posting our content on, do public forums. So those are the rounds that we get asked about. But Sean Wallace, who's a friend of the channel, asked that I do a round analysis of a Lincoln Douglas round, which I'm happy to do. Just judged Lincoln Douglas all weekend. I think I'm going to be judging high school nationals. I don't know. I just get told like an hour before the round that I have a round. So we're going to check that out. But in addition to just watching the round, we are going to go on the wiki and follow hopefully something resembling a speech doc for the round, because I know, one, the kind of like faster talking, I haven't seen the round, but I haven't seen spreading in like the middle school LD rounds I've been judging, certainly. But anyway, the quicker pace can be intimidating to some, and the kind of more technical jargon that is more common in LD tends to be intimidating to some. And one of the things that makes that really easy to digest is speech docs, which you should, in theory, be able to find. So I have the round pulled up, and let's see what we can do. Let's get this display capture going. Let's get me smaller. Not that small. I still like to feel important. Okay, so over here we have the round, Greenhill BE, Millard North GB from 2016's TOC. So just to give you an example, let's go to the NFALD wiki. Cool. This is NFALD is the college Lincoln Douglas format. And here's like a bunch of schools, and here's the school that I coach. Now, I didn't write these debate cases. These kids did with Paul's help. But here's our competitors, and here's their AVs. Is that the proper plural? But yeah, here's Brenna's AF. And let's see what form that takes. Open source. Let's take a look. I actually haven't seen these, but I don't have the actual word. Okay, cool. So looks like this isn't the like highlighted version that they are reading off of. This is just like the version for the opponents to look at before the round. And that doesn't mean that they won't. I think in the round itself they share the speech doc. I can show you what that might look like. But this is for, like, let's say it's the week before the competition, you're going to nationals or state or something. You know that DVC is signed up and you want to start cutting answers to their case, which is fair. This will read you the tags. This will tell you all the main claims that we're making in the case and what our source is, and what the like main points that we're using those sources to say are, and then you can like pull it up and see, but it doesn't show you the exact parts that we read, which I guess is fair. Though it's not a speech doc, which doesn't help us. Like, if Brenna is talking and she's reading this, I don't know why I got all Tennessee for a second. This isn't what we're going to want to follow along. We're going to ask her for a speech doc that literally shows the words she's going to be reading, in case she's too fast, or we want to verify certain things. So I guess we're just going to do the equivalent for this round and see what we can find. But if we can't find it, then I am not stressed about it because I know I can keep up. Lincoln Douglas Wiki. Cool. So this is the wiki page, and when you land on a wiki page for any given format, you're going to see the schools, but in this case, this is an old round. This is the 2020 to 2021, so we don't want that. We want to find older years, and that is going to be listed in the archived case list right there. It's TOC, so that's probably at the end of the year, so that's 2015 to 16, and we're looking for Greenhill. Greenhill. We're looking for BE. That's Bennett Eckert, and he's the affirmative. So here we go, and some round reports. Here's basically all the cards that this child read in their rounds. Now here's like a, I don't know, alcohol 1AC. It says Jan, Feb, whatever, so I don't know, when is, I'm guessing March, April is when the TOC is. Oh no, this says TOC round 1, that might be Jan, Feb, but anyway, we'll, and see, it's cut the same way, right? So this isn't the speech doc, it doesn't, contain word for word what they're saying out loud, but you can use this to look up the sources and so on, and basically prepare answers. And you can also see what theory this person is reading. So here's Picks Bad. That's a pretty good theory. They force AFs to defense minute policy changes. I don't see why that's bad. Creates incentives to find the most minute pick and net benefit. That might be fair. Multiple dispo picks bad. So yeah, this is a pretty useful resource, and if you're just getting introduced to a more, shall we say, progressive way of doing Lincoln Douglas, this can be a really useful resource. I'm just gonna go for it. Who knows? I mean, maybe these kids are going to spread me out and I'm going to look like an idiot, but I should be okay. I like your Batman hoodie. It's the 89 Tim Burton logo. Solid. Okay. Is this working? Looks like it's working. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and get started. And I feel like I'm going to want to look up the topic ahead of time because these kids don't like to say the name of the topic when they start. Because that's not like techie. That doesn't like look cool if you like say the resolution. You look like a fucking loser. If you like acknowledge what it is, in case somebody in the audience or watching this later hasn't been keeping up. No, it's fine. It's by the time it's like the 8th round of the tournament and there's one topic everybody knows. But that doesn't work well for posterity. 2015 to 16. I would like to know. I don't understand how this is. Oh, it's in reverse chronological order, and the topic. When was the? I don't want to see who won. All right, well, it's one of these. United States criminal justice system, jury nullification ought to be used in the face of perceived injustice. I don't know what any of that means. I know what those words mean individually. Resolved in the United States ought to promote democracy in the Middle East. That's a pretty good one. In the United States, private ownership of handguns ought to be banned. But there should be a giant stockpile of handguns at the center of every neighborhood that they have to share. And the National Speech and Debate Tournament topic is immigration ought to be recognized as a human right. It has been. It's in the UN Charter. But it's okay. That only goes back to the 40s. Okay. Let's see what we got. This audio sounds like what I feel like it's like to have had a stroke. Like I can't pick out any specific words. Are we good to go? This kid's warming up. I like that. I love the dramatic lighting.
You're on the internet, which I'm sure most of you are going to do anyway, just SMG.
Cool.
Can you close the door, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Looks like this is happening in some hotel somewhere. Sick. I don't understand why it's a hotel room and a... Okay. Okay. Ah, God, I hate when the thing is... Okay. This is how you can tell this kid's legit. Because he does the Aragorn... you know what? You don't know. Maybe you do. I don't know. Maybe I'm not as old as I think. But is Lord of the Rings still popular with, like, kids? When Aragorn is, like, charging into battle in Return of the King, he, like, holds his sword like this, which, like, why? How are you gonna run? Whatever. But when people do this with the timer, you can tell, like, they're about to get into some shit. So...
From drone strikes against brown bodies in the Middle East to slaughter of black youth in the streets of Chicago, the military industrial complex controls our every move and thought that small ground guns shapes our epistemology and violence becomes normalized. Giroux 16. Gun violence produce a culture so violence to use every time routine society relies on violence. Culture violence cannot be abstracted from business. Violence drives the armed industry and a military scale policy in states to enforce domestic terrorism against black youth. Sharp light competition replaces solidarity, self-interest with society, consumer predominance of a relatively unchecked gun culture is evident in the power of the gun lobby. Imperial policies match violence, this chain of repression which mutually feed each other. Civil society is generating into a military organization. Police resources power can criminalize behavior across outside of insecurity by criminalizing individuals and advanced political sovereignty has been replaced by economic sovereignty. Lobbying carried out by the NRA militarization represents a self-social logic that is constituent values and public values and the critical citizenship as a result of any public intellectuals. Militarism seen in every institution, including schools, people like considered disposal because they offend financially. Militarism prize support for policies having economic workers not being only engaged in violence that are entertained by it. This is mimicked in foreign policy, torture, and drones. Gun culture offers false forms of security. One to make sure Americans are so they can protect themselves against adversaries whipped up by politicians. Gun rights provide discourse for ignoring harsh local corporate state or monocultures do not go far enough. Gun stuff symbolic as well as actual violent fantasies, proliferate refusal to enact gun control, symptomatic of the death of democracy, not so heated politics, worse than one that puts a collapse affected in militarized culture, found by financially weird per country, approximately 300 million crimes to the third, of which your handgun G's gun is made to kill as quickly and effectively as possible, and gun culture replicates patriarchal nationalism and neoliberalism. Men get guns to protect their families from those marked as criminal. Garment 14. Owning guns produce a national identity that stores individuals and become labor American such forms being used to carry out brutal assimilation or where the emphasis of being a local subject serves as a guide and ideal for many men in the community. Nothing is more suited to be influenced by power than individuals in historical or capacities of historical realistic colonialism, capitalism, patriarchal nationals who create individuals who are likely to unknowingly conform to the comments that David A. need guns to protect themselves from India to attack them. It's not like Canadians were all living peacefully. The guns were opening the tapestry of the USA across the developing settler societies to reinforce white supremacy, discursive formations who were defined as battle versus regulatory measures that allow certain men to attain hegemonic status of weight differences and constructive lead to oppressive effects, and gun rights fuel suspicion of the collective. They atomize individuals and amplify fear and prejudice. Deborah Vander, 15. There is perhaps no individuals and working the government's NRA argues against the collective. Individuals can act impulsively in private arguments according to prejudices. Arms are sense suspicion of the collective gun suffers is very from the community causes others to treat them through the gun movement. Pits an individual against society. Collectives a suspect. Handgun bans are key. Americans view them as a quintessential weapon. The one.
Real quick. Some of these cards are a little long for my taste. Like the first card was really long. I don't like think you'd need all that analysis, especially when no one's gonna like. I mean, there's nuances, right? You want a lot of details in there, so that later you can extend those details or use them to answer back for like poor answers. But with that said, like a card that doesn't get answered may as well just be a tag. In other words, if your opponent's not going to have an answer disagreeing with a card, it may as well just be the tag and then like a sentence. So let's say you've never watched a carded format of debate. What's happening right now? You strictly do public forum and you're allowed to paraphrase, and you hear people talk about paraphrasing being bad, and you're like, whoa, that was super scary. Well, what's happening is Batman is citing evidence, and the first part is what we call a tag, which is his paraphrasing of what the evidence says. So according to, well, doesn't even say according to who yet, but says gun culture promotes the patriarchy. And then we'll say the author that supports this, the year that they supported it, and we'll read direct passages from the evidence which support that. That can be really overwhelming if you don't know what you're doing. But a couple things to have in mind. One, you can ask to see that evidence anytime you want, and you should be able to see it with the highlighted parts that they read. And I don't know what common practice for TOC in high school is, but common practice for Lincoln Douglas in college is you use a platform called SpeechDrop, and you literally just put the case in there, and it shows the parts of the evidence that you're reading and also the parts of the evidence that you're not reading. And because of disclosure, you can, in theory, you have to disclose a case after the first time you read it. When we looked at Greenhill BE's wiki page on the LD wiki, this round was not on there. What that indicates is that this is not the first time Greenhill BE has read this advocacy. So you have an indefinite amount of time to know what this argument is going to be, read the articles involved, and come up with your counter strategy. Now, a lot of people don't do this because it's time consuming and it is kind of difficult, right? That's part of what in LD gives advantage to competitors with experienced coaches or like a lot of people on the team, because they can kind of divide and conquer more easily. But at the end of the day, like, it's still good for small schools also, in my opinion, for disclosure to be a norm, because I don't know what's up with Millard North, who they are as a team, or who my friend GB is there. Doesn't have a logo on his shirt, so I can't as easily. I don't know, Noob Cybot? That's a character I can think of that's all black. Spawn had a lot of green. Any other just black characters? Black Panther has a lot of purple. Yeah, I'm gonna go with noob. I mean, people haven't done the because it doesn't read very well, does it? But yeah, so Batman versus Noob Saibot. Wow, that's a who would win for the ages. My money's on Noob Saibot because he's magic. But yeah, so it's very possible that Noob there. Wow, that's rude to call. We're gonna call him Saibot. It sounds like he's a robot, but that's fine. Saibot. He presumably he might know exactly the advocacy that's being read, has some answers ready to go, has some has like a negative strategy specifically prepared for this case, which makes evidentiary formats of debate, and I would count public forum as like a semi-evidentiary format of debate, but makes a real evidentiary format of debate like Lincoln Douglas or policy have its own level of like nuance and strategy and whatever. That's actually kind of really exciting and fun to be a part of. So it could be that this person that Saibot's just sitting there and it's just waiting to see which AF Batman reads, and is basically just putting his neg case together. Or he could be hearing it for the first time and is looking at a master document of his neg case and is basically just copy pasting the arguments that he plans to use, right? Like this DA, this T, this whatever, right? So far the case has been okay. It's been pretty, standard. Let's see. Do we have these old topics? So this is the gun topic. In the United States, private ownership of handguns ought to be banned. And what we're hearing so far is a bunch of reasons why gun ownership is bad. And some of them are... they're not critical exactly, but people might call something like this like semi-critical, right? Where it's like, it's not a critique in the sense that the negative is linking into something or the affirmative is critiquing the topic, but it is using critical lit, which is like an actual, outside of debate with the concept of a critique, is an actual, I suppose for lack of a better word, genre of academic literature, where it follows critical theory, and that might be something like feminism, and in this case, like describing the patriarchal aspects of gun ownership is a, for lack of a better term, like a semi-critical position, where it's not a critique in the sense that the link is rhetoric or some sort of action that the opponent had, but is still using the same sort of literature you might use in that kind of argument, and it has a similar impact. They're just trying to link the real world instance of this thing. So let's go back a couple seconds and get into
collective gun servers is rare from the community causes others to treat them through the gun movement. It's an individual against society. Collectives are suspect. Handgun bans are key. Americans view them.
So handgun bans are key is now trying to, one, establish the advocacy, right? Establish the link to how the AF's advocacy solves, but anytime you hear like a blank is key argument, that should signal to you that they're trying to preempt answers to a counterplan. Because handguns can be bad, but the negative doesn't have to defend that handguns are good. The negative just has to defend that that a handgun ban is not the best way of addressing the problem. So it behooves the affirmative to read an argument like handgun bans are key because, one, that is what the affirmative must defend, because that's the topical version of the... I mean, whatever, you could not defend the topic, but this kid does, right? It's very Batman of him. So Batman's defending the topic. Dope. Love that. And Batman knows, hey, in order to win this round, I must defend handgun bans as being the way of doing this. I just recorded a counterplan lecture, 2 days ago, but by the time you see this, it might have come out 2 weeks ago. And there I kind of talk about counterplans and the strategies around it and whatever. This is the doing the AF is key to preempt. Oh, he even has is that Batman or Superman? Looks kind of like a Superman logo. This kid has no loyalty. But maybe he's Batman and he just likes Superman, which is now canon for the DC universe, even though they kind of just met. There's no reason for them to like each other. Whatever, let's go.
A movement puts an individual against society, collectives a suspect. Handgun bans are key. Americans view them as a quintessential weapon. The one he sees to stand against a culture of violence. Volok 9. The court's estimation by the handgun ban is not constitutional. Inquiry how lawbreakers, regular arms, and people consider the handgun the quintessential self-defense weapon. Handguns are the most survival weapon chosen for self-defense, and the one he sees ruptures the mindset of guns as necessary.
Okay, so here we're keeping with the critical literature, right? What do I mean by that and what's really happening? Well, the affirmative is aware that there's many other policy alternatives for reducing handgun violence or the negative effects of handguns without necessarily banning them. So what's the strategy here? The affirmative is going more for the cultural and sort of like critical impacts that gun ownership has, like the patriarchal nature of gun ownership, and not necessarily just like gun deaths. Why? Because the card that he has for why gun bans are key doesn't talk about why gun bans are key to reducing gun accidents or gun homicides or gun violence. It says that gun bans are key for solving for the critical aspects of gun ownership, like the perception and the sort of more cultural aspects is the term I'm looking for. So that kind of informs what arguments he's reading as the harms so that he can resolve for them in the, you know, with the advocacy and avoid a counterplan that can solve for it. In the counterplan topic, again, we talk about, like, you want to have an AF that talks about ways that specifically doing the exact affirmative is going to have unique offense that a counterplan can't capture. So this is what that looks like in practice. So far, it's a pretty good case. I mean, it depends on what the negative reads and whether they are able to weigh something against the sort of, I don't want to call it a nebulous, like that's a really shitty thing to say, but against the kind of more, I don't know, these impacts kind of exist in critical space, and that's really important, and it really matters because epistemological death is akin to physiological death, but physiological death hurts a lot more physically and makes a lot more people cry. So, and it also depends on who your audience is, right? Like, there's some judges that are like hella into critical literature. One of the not even a debate judge exactly, or at least his competitive career wasn't in debate. He coaches debate now for a college in our circuit. Is a sister school of ours, and Doug is a good friend of He's a very good friend of one of the coaches on my team. I like to think we're friends now. But anyway, Doug does critical literature for a living. He's like he's a scholar of like Skid Row. He was just on a Netflix documentary about a murder that happened on Skid Row. Like, and this person isn't, in theory, like on paper, like a super progressive debate coach or judge, because in theory he didn't really do that, but in practice he might have done a little bit of policy back in the day. But also, like, critical literature isn't exclusive to people who do debate. Now, maybe this is less common in high school because you don't get a lot of, you know, like college professors, though, I mean, sometimes you do, judging your rounds, but it's more common that it's like, at least based on the survey research that we did, you got a young crowd of people who are really into theory and progressive arguments. You got an older crowd that's really into traditional arguments. So, this argument's only as this advocacy is only as strong as its ability to appeal to the specific set of judges that are on the other side of this camera. With that said, my understanding is that the TOC is as good a shot as you're going to get in terms of having a very progressive debate progressive, not like necessarily just politically progressive, though they kind of whatever. Anyway, so far so good. Let's keep listening to Batman.
For self-defense, people are no longer constantly reminded of guns as a means of solving their problems. Down to Hugh 15, the government puts back with the recent conversation the word race full inclusion 1 per 100,000 of brave members to fight a range of Australian gun interest in country experience a cultural shift. Guns are no longer real work self-defense, self-spreading individuals are now reminding guns remains here the address that electric grievances. Guns cause police militarization. Deborah Vander 15, guns find sex police started to react rough police and past police just by trial for treatment protests by saying the latter become violent militarized police are more likely to create the diffuse competition pressing guns threats for excuse for police to crack down. Thus the plan the state governments of the United
Okay. So far, this is really good, and this is basically following like a harms plan solvency approach. And one of the cool things with carded formats of debate is they don't have to follow a very strictly prescribed structure, where it's like, well, first you gotta say the harms, and then the plan, and then the agent of action, and so on. You can fill in gaps, and you can use your evidence to just make the point you want to make. Okay, couple things. One, delivery. One of the things you'll notice with people who, I'd call this spreading. It's not the fastest I've heard in my life, but it's certainly very, very competent. Is everybody who spreads has kind of like their own physical thing, and it kind of keeps them in the zone. It kind of keeps their pace up. For some people, like on our circuit, there was Virginia Kerr. And she debated for a community college and then SF State. And her thing is that she would tap her foot, and that was going to keep her going, and it was going to keep her tempo up. One thing that I noticed Paul does is he just clutches that timer and he rocks back and forth. And and it just kind of, you just kind of space out and you read through the case. For Batman here, it is like a back and forth step kind of thing, like the giant from Jack and the Giant Magic Beanstalk, Jack and the Giant Beanstalk, kind of like a fee-fi-fo-fum situation, which is cool. But one thing to notice, second, we've established basically a bunch of problems that exist with gun ownership. Now we need a plan, a specific advocacy not just sort of like a general advocacy for the general kind of topic like you see in public forum. We need a specific advocacy that we need to later argue solves for that. It might have some outside advantages. Given the number of cards that were read before we got to the plan, I'm guessing we're not going for that. And we're probably just going to talk about how we solve for the kind of harms cards. But we're going to read a specific advocacy, which is a way of doing the resolution that is topical. You can do what's called parametricizing. I have students that argue that parametricizing is not a word, and that parameterizing should be the word. But it's basically taking the what's allowed by the resolution and advocating for only a small portion of it, which in theory is still advocating for nothing outside of the resolution. But what it practically means, in addition to being allowed to more specifically explain how you do things, what it practically does is the negative has a bunch of disadvantages that apply to some version of doing the plan, but which will not link to your specific version of doing the resolution. So that's kind of the strategy, right? The strategy behind doing a Lincoln Douglas affirmative is how do you maximize your ability to reach the impacts that you want to talk about while minimizing the links to whatever impacts the negative wants to talk about. We'll see how that goes here. So let's see what the plan text is.
He got to sex police, started to react to police and past police, justified charge for treatment, protest by saying the library become violent, military police.
By the way, this card right here is pretty good. I mean, it's pretty hard for the negative side to capture this with a counter plan. So the card right here is saying that guns being allowed, like not being banned, justifies police militarization because police militarization is a response to the potential for the public to be armed. And the argument here is going to be, later, that banning gun ownership is going to remove the legal justification behind police militarization. Which is going to be pretty solid for, going to be hard for a counter plan that doesn't ban guns to argue that, and now police will equally not have to worry that someone in the public might not have guns. Now, there might be solvency arguments for that. It might be a lot of just because you banned handguns doesn't mean people turn in their handguns. But the point is that a counter plan isn't going to be able to capture that just as well. So, again, let's get into the plan text.
To create the diffusion competition of pressing guns, that's a perfect excuse for police to crack down. Thus, the plan, the state governments of the United States to ban private ownership of handguns framing.
So, we're going for state governments of the United States. Let's take a look at the topic. In the United States, private ownership of handguns ought to be banned. That's topical because the resolution does not specify an actor. So it doesn't say the United States federal government ought to ban handgun ownership. And it's probably also legitimate because states have unique say in the permissibility of guns. Not to the extent that this AF is probably making it out to be, but one thing that you might have read in the news recently, I live in California, and California recently had a 15-year-old ban on AR-15s reversed by a federal court. I don't know if the ban was on all AR-15s or whatever, but the point is that states... It's established in the topical literature that states get to make decisions. So the strategy here is to say that states will ban handguns. Well, why? One, probably because there are a lot of disadvantages that come from national level, either disadvantages or solvency problems that come from national level regulation. Second, because it probably avoids a 50 states counterplan. There's problems with 50 states counterplans just as a style of argument, but it could just be, you know what, let's just avoid the 50 states debate and have the 50 states do it from the get. There's a few issues here, potential issues, and we'll see what happens, right? So it's kind of like as the negative, anytime the affirmative kind of makes a turn to avoid one strategy, that should signal to you, like, maybe look for another strategy where they've now left themselves vulnerable. So let's take a look.
For police to crack down, thus the plan the state governments of the United States to ban private ownership of handguns framing.
So that plan text says the state governments of the United States. But there's a lot of governments in the United States that are not state governments, so but would fall under a federal government. One example is territories like Guam or Puerto Rico, where I don't know a lot about gun ownership there, but that's something that the affirmative now doesn't get to solve for. The reason why that might not necessarily be something that the affirmative is worried about is because if the negative comes up and says counterplan, do it at the federal level, that's not competitive. States can ban something and the federal government bans something. Think about it in terms of lifting bans, right? Like, you never have a law that says something is legal. You only have laws that says something is illegal. So with like marijuana legislation, like marijuana is illegal in states, but it's also illegal federally. So in California, we've legalized pot, which my girlfriend says I sound really old for calling it pot, but whatever, man. We've legalized pot on a state level, but that doesn't mean that you can't still technically get in trouble at the federal level for it. So you can also like do it the other way around, but the problem is that there's no competition there, right? Like, we could still federally legalize marijuana in addition to statewide doing it. So maybe a reason why we're not worried about some of the potential downfalls of answers to him going for a 50 states argument. All right.
Excuse for police to crack down, thus the plan the state governments of the United States to ban private ownership of handguns framing.
So we're not going for solvency yet. Maybe we're not going for it at all. But the framing here is just going to probably argue why the critical lens of the affirmative, like the kinds of impacts that the affirmative is going for, are going to be more important to focus on than whatever other considerations we might have. And this is, again, like why I would call this like a quasi-critical, right? It's not critical in the sense that the negative links, but it's critical in the sense that it uses critical literature and then argues that that's what we need to focus on entirely.
The resolution asks the question of desirability of the balance should be yes, and the question of desirability of the plan, link should interact with the consequences of the plan, next should find a competitive post-fiat policy option, status quo
Okay, so no, this framing is just trying to frame out a counterplan, which is what you should go for on the negative, right? The status quo is not good with handguns. A lot of people fucking die. Who we don't want dying. So the status quo is not good. The negative has to go for a counterplan. So this affirmative is trying to edge out every aspect of a counterplan advocacy that it can.
To ban private ownership of handguns framing. The resolution asks the question of desirability of the balance should be yes, and the question of desirability of the plan. Link should interact with the consequences of the plan. Next should defend a competitive post-VR policy option. Status quo discourse on gun control is embarrassing. Policy discussion is necessary for advocacy to resolve material problems. McClurg, 92. Fallacies are common discussed as social issue gun controls and premier example opinions are almost always specially held dimensional composition. We have any shows in history in the most disagreeable manner. Discourse is played by the debate seldom rose about trivial hyperbole discussions taken and name calling and non sequitur verbs. We refer to reform debate. We cannot hope to approach the law in any rational way. Gun control advocates like to believe that only those who oppose gun control guilty of second rhetoric who scrutiny reveals this false importance of dissecting gun control. What says beyond gun control, understanding rhetoric is a process every student should care about. Advocates cannot be completely effective unless they master the tools of advocacy and concrete structures or concrete reality structures existence. Black people have reality to confront. They cannot make.
So this is like preempts to various Ks that could be read at this point.
Concrete structures or concrete reality structures existence. Black people have reality to confront. They cannot make to do with philosophizing of the alternative given the reality of everyday existence. Cone 4. The world as earthly exists where human beings are slave or laws are passing against the present where you press back the world's where white and black persons live such that the latter striving for a little more room to believe in for doing everything possible to destroy black reality. The world is not a metaphysical entity or ontological problem as some philosophers would have us believe. It is very concrete. It is fighting harassment being kicked around by the police. White persons degrading rules are the underprivileged and embodied politics are a necessary way to articulate power relations. Refusal of phenomenology replicates a view from nowhere. Yancey 8. In philosophy, the only thing we expose is weak argument, fallacy, and true reasoning. The embodied self is deemed irrelevant to theory and one search for truth. The phenomenological return to the black body and satiation to out of complex social and historical indices of whites, government self-construction. Acts of self-construction are myths predicated upon maintaining white power, mythification of the replacement of history with good ideology, white elevation, black emotion, and particularism is good. Root cause claims focus on overarching structures, ignore application of material injustice. Pathos 16. Pragmatism approach which should be distinguished from theories who starting point seems that justice at large systems philosophical critique be accomplished under critique modernity. Pragmatism is not that the importance of power structure history we see present episode on the way to past practices where it takes treating this particular situation not as a global social pathology concepts of white supremacy and colonialism or tools to ameliorate particular injustice. The forces that cause the sustained domination of there's a single causal explanation of principles falsifiable, no revision, and concrete change is necessary. Pure postmodern critique results in more material violence doesn't do anything. Lane 1 without concrete action for tension of postmodern existing voices remain disconnected. The critical rush off the immediate cries of those who they know are burning in the hells of exploitation but have few strategies to deal with them. Postmodernism recycle the same sovereign outcomes, the realism discourse, divorce from practice analysis from waltzing theory from public self and critique to became or make size postmodernists and it silencing those with the greatest victims of the West conceit and metaphysical theorizing creates ivory tower activism. Shats 12. Any hesitancy does not excuse an action hegemonic forces already assume control flavor people connected to things like bullying more we went back from merely taking back the erasing doesn't give raven justice the real gains activists are making. We cannot fully escape the master style. We ought to act even if we make a cooperative campaign still look at the government now allows us to codify strategic points of resistance and influencing other people's argument that the world tax is not the same as the biopowered state matching to demonstrate how we are all interconnected and best method of engagement takes particular aspects of the system and re-articulate some. Move 13. Critique cannot consist in any larger withdrawal of engagement. The disarticulate existing discourse of re-articulation is critical. Otherwise, we leave open the door for re-articulation by non-progressive force of the strategy of X that supposes multitude will be able to rule itself in antagonism disappear in order to make room for radical negativity.
So this is a level that we haven't really talked about on the channel yet and isn't really covered in the counterplan video, but it's very similar in terms of how the game is being played. So we don't really get any solvency cards or solvency arguments here. What we get is a bunch of preempts on framework. Why framework? Well, because a critique is going to attempt to change the framework. It's going to change the role of the ballot, how the judge should make their decision, or what sort of goal their decision is in service of. And essentially what the affirmative is trying to do is trying to, as early as possible, put out as many reasons as they can for why various critiques are not legitimate in the context of this round. Before we get into like what those arguments are, I guess let's talk about like why you would do that. Why wouldn't you just let them read their arguments and then respond to them with these cards? Well, it's because of how we frame dropped arguments in debate. So by reading these arguments now, anything that doesn't get responded to, right? The negative comes up. He's, in theory, as far as Batman is concerned, going to read a critique. And that critique is going to take up, I don't know, 4 minutes of a speech if it's well thought out and fast, but maybe sometimes as much as 5 minutes. And then there's going to be some answers to case, and maybe some of this stuff gets dropped. You can then leverage those drops as framing the critique out entirely, because it's not like public forum where we kind of have like introductory speech, and then rebuttal speech. The negatives first speech it has the burden of being both introducing the introduction of the negatives' advocacy and their arguments, but also their refutation of the affirmative. So anything that doesn't get responded to in the first negative speech is straight up dropped. That's part of the strategy there. We have some arguments there, probably preempting a like anti-blackness argument. We have some arguments there. And again, you have to think about like, well, how does a critique work, right? Well, in the counterplan video, we talked about, well, what are the things that the affirmative is locked into having to do so that you know, regardless of what they choose, you get links or you have competition with your counterplan. With a critique, it's the same way. You try to think, well, what are some things that I know are going to link with the critique? And usually something like a critique of the United States federal government is, or like policy action is a sure bet. And that's why you see a lot of, I would hesitate to call them pessimism arguments in the sort of like Schopenhauer sense, but Afro-pess certainly. A lot of critiques that in one way or another criticize the affirmative for attempting to solve problems through policy changes, through policy decisions. And that's why you get a bunch of arguments and framework that are like, here's why policy decisions are a necessary step, or are key, or why just metaphysical solutions or conjectures are in some way bad. So at this point, the affirmative has made the argument, doesn't know yet what the negative is going to go for, has tried to call out several different counterplan or K options, and tried to de-link out of some DAs by not using the federal government. This first cross-X is going to be really important because it's going to, for the negative, is going to be the links that they're trying to get for their future arguments, and for the affirmative is going to be their first glimpse into what the negative strategy is, and is going to give Batman his first opportunity to counter the narrative that he presumes the negative is going to go for. And how effective each side will be is going to depend on how well shrouded, let's say, they can make their strategy through cross-X. Let's see.
Let's start negative. Where's that?
Smoke. But Smoke hangs out with Noob Saibot. I think there are like one.
Okay, so your Papa's evidence indicates that root cause claims are bad. It seems to me the affirmative makes a root cause claim about the way the cultures of gun violence function. How is there a distinction between this and any potential root cause presented by the negative?
So you can, one, tell that that question was pre-written, but two, that's an interesting question to point out. So a lot of critiques are going to argue that the critical issues being discussed are the root cause of whatever practical issues are being discussed, and the reason they do that is because they want to argue that voting on the roll of the ballot of the critique solves for the affirmative, a lot like a counterplan. Critiques and counterplans have several things in common. I don't know whether to say a lot in common. They kind of do, they kind of don't. But the issue that Noob Cybot has noticed is that, well, they're going for framework arguments that kind of push us away from a critique framing, and that's probably a lot of generic cards that were tagged on, but the affirmative's advocacy in itself uses a lot of critical framing. So he's essentially turning that, turning the framework arguments against the AF's advocacy. Let's see what the answer is.
I mean, we say that gun culture is the root cause of violence that is caused by gun culture, which seems to make sense. Our argument is like gun culture causes gun violence.
I know what you're arguing.
Yeah, see, that's not a good answer, because the card in question says that looking for root cause type explanations is inherently not effective. And the only thing the affirmative has done here is justify the root cause card, or at least explain what the root card says. Root cause card. A little difficult. And what we're about to hear Cybot say is, no, I know what your root cause card says, but how does that mesh with your card that says we should not be looking for root cause explanations? Now, it's unlikely that the negative is going to get the entire affirmative thrown out because of the framework card, but it's probably enough to open a door for more of the critique that the negative wants to read. Maybe, jeez, it's 2016, huh? I don't know. Afropest? Neolib? Cap? I don't know. Let's see.
About gun violence. My
But
question
our
is, how
argument
does
is
dodge
that
a root cause
we
claim
will
matter?
not make a root cause claim that gun culture structures and creates all other forms of oppression.
Okay, but that's your card. Like the affirmative, Batman sees the problem there and is like, okay, I'm not gonna do that. But I mean, you just cut out half your advocacy, right? Like, that's half of your impact scenario. And hopefully, you still got something left, but really good strategy on the negative.
Which is what our Kappa's evidence indicates.
Then your Ling evidence indicates that postmodern theorizing doesn't do anything. Why?
I mean, I think our evidence about how that has consistently resulted in critique that still allows material conditions of violence to continue is pretty good. It says that they brush off immediate cries of people that are, quote, burning in the hells of exploitation, and they just allow material violence to continue while they criticize more abstract concepts without...
Okay, what counts as metaphysical theorizing in the context of your Shat's evidence?
What do you mean?
Okay, so the first question that was asked in this segment is essentially, you have a card that says that just like critiques are useless. What's your evidence there? And there's pretty good arguments, right? There's like, yeah, just, I don't know, like thinking about all the metaphysical implications of something probably hinders people from addressing real direct issues. So, okay, that answer didn't really help, but now the question is whether that links to this case. So now the question is, okay, what counts as like metaphysical theorizing, so that the negative can say, okay, our K is not just like imagining things that aren't productive to helping people in immediate need. We do in some way help that, or at least don't meet the affirmative's framing of what that card is talking about.
Counts as metaphysical.
What is a metaphysical theorizing?
I mean, I think theorizing about things like ontology and epistemology without making direct applications to how that materially impacts.
Okay, what does it mean to make a
lives.
direct application to how it materially impacts lives?
Like he's looking for reasons why the K is why the specific card that got read does not apply to the specific critique that he wants to read.
In the way that the alternative, is what I assume it would be, would resolve the material violence that occurs in the world of the AF. That would still be the instance of that. All of our 1AC evidence indicates that like concrete action is a good way to do that.
Okay. Now,
what is I guess concrete action's a little vague for me there. But with that said, I also don't anticipate the negative coming up with anything that resembles concrete action. And given that, the affirmative's best strategy later is to ask the negative what doing the K actually looks like. We'll get there, though.
Culture?
What do you mean, what is culture? It's a good way to do that.
Okay. Now, what is culture?
What do you mean, what is culture? We say that is the overarching structures that have produced beliefs that like a society has.
Okay. And how do we change culture?
The 1AC Donahue evidence indicates that in the context of the 1AC, we don't make a claim about changing culture writ large. In the context of the 1AC, our Donahue evidence indicates that because people recognized that handguns were no longer necessary because they didn't have them anymore and they still did okay, we shifted away from a culture of self-defense, which our dominant evidence indicates is historically settler colonial and anti-black.
Okay.
So there's two ways that question could have been going, right? One could have been from a solvency approach of what is culture, so that you can explain what culture is, so that they can explain how your AF isn't able to change that, and that's the sense in which the affirmative is answering the question. But the other way of framing that is, hey, what is culture? In order to get the affirmative to say the thing that they are changing, so that the critique can say, no. We actually change like real culture or whatever the other like real root cause is, and that is fundamentally different than what the affirmative is able to change, and it has better solvency or wider impacts or whatever.
So your move evidence indicates that we need to take specific stuff that happens now and then re-articulate them. What kind of, does she indicate a particular kind of re-articulation?
Not sure what that means, especially absent the context of some alternative.
No, I'm saying, does the card itself advocate like a particular kind of like redefinition?
No.
So it just says redefinitions are good, but doesn't outline which kind of redefinitions are good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he's just gonna go for we meet that framework, right? Like my K also redefines something.
And what is the warrant in your first piece of Giroux evidence? It seems to be me making an empirical claim about the way things have happened, but doesn't seem to have a normative claim about why that's how things are going to happen in the future.
I mean, I think that our past experiences are a decent basis for how the future will continue to occur. I also think arguments about how just the logical causal-based arguments in this evidence that say that gun culture is fueled because individuals are self-interested, which drives them to do things like create profit, which results in scapegoating and the politics of disposability is indicated by that evidence.
I think that's a pretty good answer generally, but I would have liked to hear something more related to the card. Like, is your card attempting to make a statement about what we can expect from the future? If not, then you shouldn't cut it that way. But I guess what the card might have been saying is like, here is what types of decisions have led to good outcomes. In which case, yeah, you're kind of stuck making the we think it'll apply in the future argument.
Pretty good. Sorry, bro.
Ooh, just smash that laptop into the table. Okay, I'm sure it's fine. No, that's a Batman logo. Or Wonder Woman logo? No, it doesn't have the W at the bottom. That's Batman-esque. I'm gonna go with it's Batman. I'm gonna get some more water. I'll be right back. Brought pistachios. White people pistachios are weird, dude. What do you mean you don't have shells? Whatever. Okay. Take a prep. Okay.
Should be no surprises here. I'm sure.
Probably indicates to me that the negative is going to run the exact strategy that the affirmative tried to preempt with the framework cards. I mean, some serious business here.
Got it? Yep.
That Table toad is precariously close to the edge of the table. And some causing a bit of an
Or is
emotional
one-off
crisis for me.
Or restricted
One-off case. Oh my lord. Sean, why would you do this to me? So, the more you do debate, there's a finite number of viable strategies that are going to work with any topic, right? Like, for example, let's say we have a disadvantage. Well, you wouldn't run one disadvantage. So that's not one-off case. Unless you have a counter plan. You probably want to... you would probably want a disadvantage for that counter plan to avoid. You wouldn't just run a T by itself. Maybe you would run like a TDA instead of 2 DAs. If it's 3 off, it'd be like a TDA counter plan. But since it's one-off case, that means it's a critique. And given the preempts, my guess is Afro-pessimism. I don't know why I just spit everywhere. Let's see.
Probably an overview. I'd flow straight down their offense. It's fair.
Hey, you should probably fix that leg. It's
gonna fall.
It's not like that. No, the other one. No.
Thank you, Judge, in the...
Oh,
Oh, that's not even the one I was
my
worried
stance.
about.
I'm just gonna use Bennett's.
What's the order again?
One off, and then case with you probably flow the offense.
That's nice of them to share.
Straight down on the offense level, and there's gonna be a bit more of an interaction on the framework level.
Okay.
Yeah, I bet there's going to be interaction on the framework level.
Sorry.
Because the framework level is going to be the only interaction. The negative is going to be like, yeah, we solved for all that stuff that they said they solved for.
Danny, are you still flashing?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm ready. I should have skipped ahead. But everybody has their focus.
Yeah, I guess
Got
so.
your-
Alright. Everybody ready? Cool. Welcome again to the realm of the queer suicide bomber. No matter how liberal you think you are, there's always a deviant you want to ban. The thesis of the negative that queerness is a ballistic weapon, a handgun, a affirmative attempt to ban deviance, to ban queerness and danger. Instead, we embrace the queer ballistic body and focus on embodied experience and more discourse. We see liberal individuals, but opposed to form otherwise fully expressing the expression exists primarily externally self within broader culture, which our position as speakers is of simple conduits in the larger everything field of sound, language, and affect with Sumio too. There's an impersonal expression of agencies, processes take, processes neither sort of the individual body, neither particular institution is influence expressions of rather for what may become a scattered or over what will capture the potential subject. The objects that are all conditions which movement in the expression streams of expression of them for ongoing self damnation of moral imperative position to speaker reasonably from personal experience of the expression of the body is not audible, maybe domesticated belonging secondarily language. For a second party, third party, neither who seeing expressions always move, pneumatically make responsibility even as expressing settles is already extended to a next unknown destination. The expression is not dependent on generally moral assigning responsibility to ethics as opposed to morality. A question of how one contributes to the expression expressed in the world and ethic endeavor to ally oneself for change toward ethics emerges, and liberal subject formation is predicated in the imperative of holy peaceful order, for that is enacted by the erasure of political difference or unending war upon the base fight of justice.
Should have known it wouldn't be Afro-Pest because he's not Afro. But yeah, it seems like queer pessimism. But let's see. So let's try our luck. Since this was a predicted, he was like no surprises. Let's. I also don't want to presume gender here, right? They. I don't know. But okay, Millard North GB. Let's go. Lincoln Douglas Wiki. Go back here. Archived case list 2015 to 16. Millard North. What's any? Nebraska? What is it? GB? Grant Brown. Negative. Queer suicide bomber. Great. Not sure what this zeroth circle, first circle, second circle situation is, but let's see. Are they the same? Well, whatever. If we wanted to, we could basically find queer suicide bomber, diaspora add-on, criminal justice link. Queer suicide bomber is the argument. Okay, let's start the case again. But yeah, this stuff is here, and if you want to read it, the suicide bomber and her gift of death. When poetry exposes itself, is exposing itself to this very tension. Nothing we can say of her except the fact that she is dead. And perhaps that she was queer? Let's see what else we have. On the very possibility of queer theory in Deleuze and Queer Theory, edited by Trisanthi Nigiani, or perhaps pronounced another way, and Mary Storr, Edinburgh University Press. Okay, all right, let's just listen to the argument, right? That's what I would do if I was a judge. And in my judging philosophy, I'm not crazy about critiques, but we'll get into why that is in just a moment. Let's go. I missed the play button. Let's now go.
Welcome again to the realm of the queer suicide bomber. No matter how little you think you are, there's always a deviant you want to ban. The thesis of the negative that queerness is a ballistic weapon, a handgun, an affirmative attempt to ban deviance, to ban queerness and danger. Instead, we embrace the queer ballistic body and focus on embodied experience and more discourse to see liberal individuals, but opposed to forward expressing the expression exists primarily external to self for the broader culture, which our position is.
We're drawing a connection between banning handguns and banning queerness.
Speakers and have simple condoms in the larger everything field of sound, language, and affect with Sumio too. There's an impersonal expression of agencies, processes take, processes neither sort of the individual body, not even a particular institution, is influence expressions of broad potential for what may become a scattered or over what will capture the potential subject. The objects that are all conscious of which movement in the expression streams of expression of them for the ongoing self-created damnation of moral imperative position to speaker easily from personal experience of the expression of the body is not audible, maybe domesticatable, only secondarily language. For a second party, third party, neither who is expressions always remove, pneumatically make responsibility, even as expressing settles is already extended to a next unknown destination. The expression is not dependent on generally moral assigning responsibility to an ethics as opposed to morality, a question of how one contributes to the expression expressing the world and ethic endeavor to ally oneself for change for ethics emerges, and liberal subject formation is predicated in the imperative of holy peaceful order, for that is enacted by the erasure of political difference for unending war on the basis of justifying particular modes of life is normal. Evans 10.
This kid is way faster than the first kid. This kid's like fast. Okay.
Liberals is practiced to be continuous recourse of war. Liberal peace predicating the elimination of political difference. War peace command the more wars are collective chief. Liberal war becomes profoundly shape of war. The project for removing war because the lethal enemy process found between divalities like itself. Liberalism gains its mastery by posing a global ambition by political imperative for unification of the species. Formidable war have always been allowing for life politics and continuation of war by other means. Destiny humanity breach of the necessity of political strategy becomes dangerous. Birth from within liberal imaginary violence sanctioned against the doing what is necessary, or the enemies of humanity doing what is necessary. Of global speech necessity requires that life that only commits violence can think on political commitment to political difference by biopolitical life. So commitment to supremacy, embrace and hold power, and it's how to define the norm against those who deviate from that norm to dangerous others. It exists in the population mobilized for the purpose of wholesale slaughter through the discord practice of qualification. The one is capable of producing a break in life that underpowers and between one live and one must die. Political acts become more utilitarian and constantly redefining the threshold of life, which distinguishes separates it from the inside from the outside. The political, the biopolitical racial imperative is imposed in the most uniformly categorical failure to address unnecessary violence, and continues to be an essential figure in the liberal encounter. Vote negative to affirm the queer suicide bomber. The disciplinary.
Okay. We haven't made a critique lecture yet, because nobody watches the lectures. I don't like making them, and you don't like watching them. But a critique has several parts. We're now getting to the frame. So the framework is going to tell you a little bit about basically how to evaluate and why to evaluate the issues discussed in this critique highly, and it's just going to talk about a lot of root cause issues, and we even got some like people of color situation in there. Now we're getting to what the alternative is. The alternative is essentially the K equivalent of the counterplan text, which in this case is going to, in pretty much every K, is going to be vote negative in order to blank. The reason why you want it to say vote negative in order to is to try to shield yourself from a perm. Because if the alternative is just reject capitalism, then the perm can just say like vote AF and reject capitalism. So that's why negatives will try to frame their alternatives as vote negative in order to blank. Which doesn't really shield you all that well, because the part where you vote negative doesn't lead to your impacts. But whatever. So let's take a look at this alt.
And continues to be an essential figure in the real-world counter. Vote negative to affirm the queer suicide bomber. The disciplinary enforcement of stabilized liberal identity necessitates a strategy reflecting upon that which blurs the categories of identification of terrorist queer. The suicide terrorist resonates as the figure of anti-normativity, which moves understanding from rationality to irrational intensity of life and obliterates the being of the human subject in favor of queer becoming. 407. Why the suicide bomber cannot be talked about without being condemned? Like, desires here to suspend this by analysis, representation, with the reading of matter, and pondering the modalities of the terrorist body together, assembles organic and inorganic, seeing that obliterates the dialectic self-annihilation, acts of self-preservation, and giving of life to the future political structures emanating from the violent conditions of life and possibility of this body, reinforce reconciliation, opposite class, a habitation of contradictions, a soon-to-be detonated weapon forms part of the body is transformed into a weapon, death becomes fused into one body, it becomes a ballistic body, one penetrative energy sense, charged with metal and torn flesh, swimming off into the ether, suicide resistance, evasion, describe the body with no other means to get through its sides are forever shifting, unable to satisfactorily delineate between queer and total destructions of queer side of the suicide bomber, and our displacement of subjectivity, nailed to creation of space of queerness, they allow and even forced to come together in a cathartic gathering. 410. Conviviality may complicate how subjects are positioned, underscoring what fluid relations, conviviality foregrounds race, gender, and sexuality different rather than identities or entities or attributes. They turn to affect matters because affect makes it plausible, yet impossible conviviality mutual to marry message to be better capable to live with conviviality is not merely called as universal nor individuated, it's rather futurity comes through relative materiality, not becoming with conviviality, ethical orientation, bodies that come together to dissipate the vulnerabilities. These encounters are rarely comfortable merged, rather entail forms of madness that could unravel themselves with the political transformations of body. Conviviality is open to some dissolution, self-annihilation, the challenges how to craft convivial practices that not humanity to reinvest in the formal content and its outcome. And the role of the ballot is to vote for who best methodologically engages in unintelligibility. The drive to make all things encodable and understandable destroys differs by the overproliferation of meaning, metaphor, and unintelligibility. It's used in encodability through both exposing itself for remaining ambiguous. Fernando 10. When poetry is...
So let's give an example of what finding that card would look like. So we're looking for Fernando 10. Evans, Jasper, Fernando 10. The role of the ballot, right? The role of the ballot is a framework argument. The modern world consists through, and when I'm listening to him, I follow 1 out of 5 to 8 words, but I just know enough about what happens in debates to kind of connect the dots between what's being said. I personally never competed at this speed, so I never really practiced speaking at this speed or practiced flowing at this speed, but I sometimes have to judge at this speed, and I tell them, what my experience level is and so on. But also when I'm judging at this speed, I'm given a speech doc because I judge college. The modern world consists through making all things encodable and understandable, causing homogenization. I don't know why the modern world consists through making all things encodable and understandable. I think we spend a lot of effort romanticizing things as being ununderstandable, like love. But which destroys difference and produces meaninglessness. That would argue that meaninglessness is unique to the modern world and not just the horrific hellscape of a universe that we live in. Yet the nature of metaphor is that it exposes itself to those who experience it, yet maintains ambiguity as to how this relationship is truly constituted. Okay, as long as Fernando says that, that's fine, I guess. Again, I don't know that metaphors are all that ambiguous, but I suppose they're supposed to be. The negative's retaining of symbolic metaphor is a poetic affirmation akin to the unknowability of a suicide bomber's destruction that allows us to retain possibility and prevents the disappearance of meaning. Those are several multisyllable words. Let's see what Fernando 10 actually says. Poetry exposes itself. It is exposing itself to this very tension, and nothing we can say of her except that she is dead. So, not very helpful without seeing the actual card, which I don't have a link to, but let's take a look. The suicide bomber and her. Oh, cool. I love when K-Lit is cut from a book that I don't have access to, because that makes debate awesome. But the advocacy itself, I don't mean to shit on it. It's pretty good. He is very talented, and it's probably a solid K. I mean, I'm not saying any obvious problems with it yet. I don't like that, 5 years later, it's somewhat difficult for me to access something resembling a speech doc, but I doubt that was GB's concern in the moment. All right, let's go.
Itself with positive relation, now maintaining ambiguity, the possibility of metaphors disappearing due to the violent loss of permanency of weight, and things like everything else. One, no longer seems to be any longer. Is this result that then disappearing one another into meaningless? Is the metaphor that doesn't allow any distinction, one another doesn't allow any to equate with one another, prevents for disappearing suicide bombers. One, that reminds us of the impossibility of returning, the impossibility of knowing what she is. One must be willing to consider this possible never-resting finality. Now, case.
Okay. There's a lot of... Okay. How do you answer this K? The best answer to a K is the same as the best answer to a counterplan, which is a perm. And essentially, you just want to argue that you can be the AF and engage in the methodology of the critique, right? You could, the affirmative can be an instance of the critique. For example, who's to say the affirmative is not a metaphor? Hopefully not the affirmative, right? The affirmative could say metaphors are bad, but that's not really the most strategic way of approaching this, right? So what I would do as the affirmative speaker is ask a bunch of questions that basically establish the vague boundaries around what is or isn't a metaphor, and try to establish that and I mean, there might be some arguments coming here now that we're going into case, like why the affirmative doesn't meet that. My assumption is that there's going to be a couple links for why the affirmative is engaging in, whatever the problem is, and then some framework answers. Let's see.
Violence of the queer body tends to push a queer out of time, rendering queers inherently dead. That's irrational, unexplainable by rational understandings. We must explode our understanding of the body to understand queerness, and we love overkill. It's excess violence that puts the body beyond death through the heart to stop pushing. The killing is not finished, the aim is not the end, specific life at all.
So here's a root cause argument that that the affirmative was trying to preempt, but it's just like, hey, in order to understand the issue that you're trying to solve, we must first understand the issue that the critique is trying to address.
Or queer life utility gives way to the pleasure of the morale of others' mortality. The task, if any, that was respect going to be the number of times of life and death. If death after the first 3 stabs, what did the remaining 51 signify overkill? Name technology to do away with what's already gone. Queers are specters whose threat is unimaginable, whose force absolutely murder will push backwards at a time. Then into that which becomes before the human resides in space of life and right. The queer inhabits the zone of death overkill. Constitutes liberal democracy. Material symbiotics overkill is shouting only individual pathologies and just acts and social words with their ambassadors. Now go down on the case flow. We'll make a couple more arguments here. On the sake of the debate, first we offer an alternative. You can say is inevitable or deviancy allowed. Together in gray space that is our conviviality. the evidence means that saying inevitable claims to not take up the entire critique. The second argument I make is that queer violence is irrational. It turns all of your policy-making arguments to indicate that policy-making in bite-sized pieces is probably not sufficient to be able to understand queerness as understand the evidence. Third is that the state is not foreclosed. Redefining in new ways is what the alternative does. It means that we can make a form of statehood and just don't know what it looks like. The kind of ambiguity of what the negative queer state could look like is exactly the argument that we make is good and probably more effective strategy. Fourth is micro-political action-based assemblages or net better or arguments that ultimately be fluid structures that connect to a larger process of the world. That is true. Then that means we have a micro-level interaction, macro-level interactions to enforce the kind of encodability that Fernando evidence indicates bad because they try to make everything to bite-sized pieces and they cut corners. That is exactly the kind of view that policymakers do not know every situation and they never will, which means that we should probably embrace the micro-political action now on the abstraction debate. One, there's an impact to do abstraction. Abstraction is necessary to understand violence. These are models. You play catch-up. But we stand in from the start. Our argument is that we're necessary to be able to understand the violence that happens within the world that is irrational. Even your Jerome evidence indicates that there is an irrational nature of gun violence. Second, there's no link we control. Unique question is not the world. It's the world that is abstract, not us. We're just descriptive of the way the world functions for queerness. Third is the strategic abstraction. Our methodology is good, specifically in this case. You should not isolate generalities, but instead specific methodology is negative. He needs to be reason why the queer suicide bomber is a particular bad offense. Now, let's go, just more on the case debate. Our evidence recalls the entirety of militarism debate, so London extended by saying that it's completely conceded first. There's a homo-nationalism descent to the entirety of his militarism argument, the attempt to attack the state, engagement through state and codes of queer body. This is the topic for par excellence. The idea that no matter how liberal you are, there's always someone you're going to exclude. That means a place of queerness that is open to all kinds of deviancy is probably a net better. Now let's go to the framing issues. First, the balance with the evaluation of the plan. One, evaluate to make more holistic. Keep clash and focus on the entirety of the plan. Held counterplan critique evaluation because it's just a question whether or not the affirmative is a good idea. We can take the risk of offense. We think that you should evaluate the alternative by the affirmative, like alternative versus the app. Competing worlds. Two, we meet our link to the concept of your advocacy statement. We make the 1 AR proof good reason why we violate any of our arguments or why the negative is uniquely unfair. Now, the McClure argument, he says super gun control stuff right now is really bad. But argument the reality defense against any of your reality arguments. And also, this argument does not apply to the negative. You can talk about gun control all you want. We think that the negatives are a burden for joiners only to contest the affirmative, which is probably better for negative ground and strategy, especially when there's like new cards in the affirmative. The TOC now are hidden reality arguments. Again, as I said above, defense against all of materiality arguments because it indicates there is a risk of materiality in the affirmative. He says concrete structures are resistance. We cannot do with philosophy. One, we agree the earth is grounded. We disagree with the methodology bad for blackness. Our poor alternative is specific to the idea of human bodies, which means that, for example, individual brown bodies in the Middle East, as you talk about the top of your app, are probably already encoded as terrorists, which means that we are a good methodology. That second philosophy is actualizable. Even people like Curry are philosophers. We are living as political, which means that we probably do all of your arguments now on the rest of the leave from nowhere debate. Arguments are good in the context of the state form. Generic claims are necessary to be able to actually actualize policies. We think that the convivial gathering that just understands the words assemblage is probably better than very specific claims that identify that split into individual pieces. We think that micropolitical action that comes together is probably best. Now, using medical theorizing, one, we can definitely examine the world while still actualizing it. That's all of our conviviality. We can choose about methodology, take specific stuff from articulate, and this is the thesis of the negative, or arguments that ultimately take things that have been said before, like the affirmative's idea of guns, and we make them deviant.
Okay, this gets really good at debate. He's definitely the more practiced, the more the more practiced. I guess that's the only word I would use. There's issues that I personally have with the advocacy that are no indication of anything this, kid having done wrong. But I'd like to see them challenged in this cross-examination. And there's some fundamental questions that I'd like to see asked. The first question is, what does doing the alternative look like? Like, how do we do the alternative? Now, a lot of Ks will be like, reject the AF in order to do blank. But that's a negative statement, right? That's like, hey, I want you to go to Disneyland and don't ride the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. Like, that doesn't tell me anything about what we're actually doing while we're at Disneyland, other than not riding Pirates of the Caribbean or the fucking Jungle Cruise or whatever, right? And what I think a lot of Ks struggle to do is describe what the actual advocacy is. What is it that we are actually doing? Because a lot of the time, doing what the actual advocacy is doesn't necessarily entail rejecting the affirmative. Or it just doesn't solve. But let's see what... That's the most fundamental question that I want to see asked. What does doing the alternative look like? Let's see what the actual cross-X questions are.
Everybody good? 1 second. Oh, you did not read the BFO card.
Yeah, didn't read BFO or Strike.
Cool. Everybody good? Probably silly questions. That's the ball. What does career suicide bomber mean?
The career suicide bomber requires methodological analysis of the way suicide bombing and our interactions with the world can be rendered colder.
Okay, what does it mean to be career?
In the context of our evidence, it's the idea of being a deviant force.
Okay, so the career suicide bomber is like an embracing of or an engagement with this like queer or deviant force, right?
Yeah.
Okay, who is the agent of the alternative? Who does the career suicide bombing? Or metaphorically?
That's the question I'm asking. What does doing the alternative look like? In this case, the question is, who is the agent of the alternative? Who is doing the thing? My guess is the answer is the people in this room. Let's find out.
Our argument is that individuals who are labeled deviant have the potential to be queer suicide bombers.
Okay.
But that's not the question. Your alt is endorse queer suicide bombing. Who does that thing that we are endorsing? Now, I get that in the abstract that it's not certain people or it is people who are deviant. But like literally speaking, who are we endorsing? Say that, Batman.
So, for example, like black people are labeled deviant, they can be queer suicide bombers.
We think that could be a productive methodology.
Okay.
Yes.
How could Trayvon Martin have been a queer suicide bomber?
Yeah, so our argument obviously is a methodological analysis. I think if you take out specific situations, it might sound absurd, but we think in terms
Okay.
Wait.
Next question then. If once you take it to specific situations, it becomes absurd.
No, our argument is that it's a methodological analysis of the way the world works, and we think that this is a good whole.
I don't know why an analysis of the way the world works ought not to work with specific examples. You would think if it's the way the world works, it would welcome specific examples.
Holistic understanding. Obviously,
right. So
like it's holistic, as it represents the whole, but it also doesn't apply to individual instances.
When he's being chased by Zimmerman, could not have been the actualized queer suicide bomber. We think there is methodologies that can be done to do that.
Okay, well, wait, so what do those look like? If it doesn't apply in specific instances...
Yeah, our conviviality argument makes a good thing about that.
Question, what does that word mean?
Conviviality is like a coming togetherness and like coalescing together through like deviancy.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's a good idea of what the alternative looks like.
I'm still confused about how that resolves things like our
Trayvon Martin I'm going on to that. So, for example, Shanika Shakur wrote a book called The Monster, and he was about his autobiography of being in prison, how the Crips imagined themselves as basically weapons against the police state of the United States. And we think that that is a kind of example of conviviality, the embracing of deviancy that is able to be mobilizing. Obviously, our argument is not that queer suicide...
Which is fair, by the way, if you're actually paying attention. The question of how a group of people that are deviant can see themselves as opposed to like a problem like Crips are a really good example to use. Not only because Snoop Dogg keeps a blue flag hanging out his backside, but only on the left side. Yeah, that's a Crip side. But no, because CRIP stands for Community Restoration and Progress. And yeah, it's clear that, or at least it's implied, that the people who are engaged in this highly deviant social group are actually interested in improving their community through deviance and through lawlessness.
don't mean necessarily a
Okay,
specific person,
cool.
but it's a process.
Cool. The Massamy evidence, where does it say that embodied experience focus of the one I see actually causes liberal individualism? Like, I just don't see those words in this card.
The card discusses what happens when we impose form upon expression. It might not say.
See, like, that's a little vague for me. The card describes what happens when we impose form upon expression. Can you describe one instance of expression that didn't inhabit a form? What does that mean? I don't know.
Towards
No
liberal
idea what that
individual. Okay,
says,
so
man.
yeah, okay, so the argument is that ultimately, expression and culture and things like that are not something we can morph like avatars, like Airbender. Instead, they're things that
That's not
they're
what
constantly
avatar
bouncing
means.
off of us and kind of moving through us.
Okay.
Which means we can't control them.
Alright, so how does the suicide bomber account for overarching structures of things like anti-blackness that seem to, like, impose...
Yeah, so we critique the way in which we currently understand those structures and problematize the fact that those structures even exist.
Right, I understand that we problematize that those structures exist, but how does individual affirmation change overarching
We think
structures?
conviviality is basically a card, like conviviality, but again, answers this.
Okay.
And that we carve a space out of the current form and enable it to be repurposed, which is why we need your move evidence.
You taking prep yet, or what's up? You start time? I guess you did. I don't know. Whatever. It's certainly a more complex round than we typically cover on the channel. But whatever. I'm here for it. I'm all about it. I don't have a stake in either side quite yet.
408.
408 what remaining?
What's the order?
The advantage page of the case. The only thing I have float on that is the overkill argument, the framework page, the critique.
I like that you're using multiple pages.
Advantage framework. Then what?
The K.
Advantage framework then the K. Advantage framework then the K. Yeah, alright, whatever. Yeah, no problem. Well, I just right-clicked on accident. Sure. Let's do it. Let's go.
Are there any new cards in this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the one you see.
Mirroring debate, just read it back.
Shake yourself loose.
We're starting with this overview.
What's happening?
Alright. Are you still flashing?
Yes.
Alright.
Mm. Seemed like nice
Gun violence.
kids. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Pick this volume up. Shit's getting real. Alright, let's see.
Gun violence disproportionately occurs to black people. The culture of violence surrounding guns results in police mobilization of blocks disposability marks black people as criminal only. Handgun ban, shadow status quo, mindset of painting black self-defense, and demilitarize the police. Additionally, guns are rooted in the mindset of a universal level subject that constructs who is more good or bad by overarching structures, which links to the critique. You say, the critique, that's all the one I see advantage evidence. You say, overkill. 1, you concede our changeable self-zero argument, which is down Hugh 15, which means that we will still resolve some changeable conditions of oppression. So if we win our framework arguments, it doesn't matter. Second, it assumes that you win your framework arguments or any of your arguments on the critique page about how you would resolve that now. The framework debate starting on the state good bad stuff, gun control, policy debates are key to advocacy skills, which ensures the direction of all their impacts. Policy deficit to the obvious, they don't access our advocacy framework impacts, and even a policy isn't ultimately valuable, which is all the arguments they make. It's still a useful heuristic to learn about solving problems in the real, which is our molecular evidence, and the one I see common evidence and impacts our framework argument in the context of gun control, and at worst, we get to weigh the case. You say that micro-political action is better, but our argument is just that we should still learn about the states of governor advocacy, about how to criticize those structures better in the real world. You say that abstraction is good, however, prefer materialism. First, our puppets evidence greater on this issue. 8 point, we have an epistemic claim that moral investigations start with response to practical material problems instead of analysis of overarching structures. Like liberalism must be framed around resolving those material impacts, otherwise we wouldn't care about the structures in the first place. B point, the K doesn't have an external impact. Vague root cause of violence claims do not matter because they are not reverse causal. C point, the world is concrete, not some metaphysical problem. The problem isn't just unintelligibility. It's being kicked around by the police. His answer to the Trayvon question, CX, was, for lack of better words, embarrassing. There is nothing that the queer suicide bomber does in that instance which justifies the permutation, which is also our co-evidence of the critique. Their link evidence is terrible, doesn't talk about embodied experience being bad, which means that there's no specific link to the one I see. If you don't have a clear link argument of the one I see, the vote affect shapes on when I response to 70 said you wouldn't be able to explain the argument back and cross-apply the one I see deprivated or negament evidence violence is relative. It is easy to what you want in liberal California, but on rural Georgia, use of guns prevents people from becoming, and because guns construct a national identity rooted in the liberal soft ideas, people are constantly afraid, and they can't just say, fuck it, I'll be a suicide bomber. Link turn, and means there's no solvency. Also, the alt reifies anti-queer violence as an explanation for everything, which makes it analytically meaningless. Richie 15 bars arguments offer serious flaws in elevating homonationalism, national narrative. Critics have removed the concrete context and released it in advocacy signifiers. Homonationalism severely limits capacity to shed light. Everyday experiences lack of attention to particular sites where public authority is exercised translates into a fetishization of this is the totalizing logic. There are queers who cannot afford to deprivilege a human body as a distinct organic thing and is trained by overlapping structures and practices of power which are best critique by understanding circumstances of their emergence, and alt solves nothing. Identity is overdetermined by existing structures. Self-construction is a myth for black people because they are marked as criminal from above. So even if individual affirmation of queerness, so even individual affirmation doesn't solve the underlying structure of violence. That's the one I see Yancey and comment evidence. How was Trayvon supposed to become a queer suicide bomber, which is an independent decide the alternative permutation to both perm to the plan. We all know that the instance is double-minded. There's not sufficient to overcome the links in the first place. So the perm cells all residual links perm white people to throw our bodies online for people of color to be able to affirm themselves as queer by breaking down those totalizing structures. Even if you are a quote-unquote queer suicide bomber, you are still going to get shot in the street, which means that only the case solves that where the impact affective politics fails to spill out. Switch 12, the affective term is auto-packing or remaining about in individual feelings and undermines the possibility of breaking out in collective action machine because dimensions of affective self-esteem pride voice yet hopefully ensures affective significance to be obscure and ambiguous lack of coherence marks certain exhaustion or recognition also persists that purpose seems to we're now compounding the affective that has characterized much of the recent discourse on youth and political engagement. Openness to flux destroys the foundations for equality. Shorts a post-structuralist theories to the political structure of what institutions are need to undermine democracy. Of course, if one is never had one which competitive compensation but participation to be open society needs institutional guarantee democratic rights political movement struggle to continue structure meetings about the rights to be guaranteed. Such arguments are inevitably granted or whatever arguments that go beyond certain flux and different politics they can only be sustained by flux of history world realities. Social movements contest dominant narratives in the name of a stable alternative have their existence. Social movement that defines primary values has instability and flux, which means that we have also on our flux test the alternative. He will try to extend the role of the ballot to assume all of our offensive arguments, all of the obviously the tangible conditions, good stuff that we did on case response to this, and just means that in comparing the case versus the alternative, the permutation versus the alternative, it should be a question of who best resolves material conditions of violence.
I take it back. Batman's Batman's very quick. I feel like Batman's at least as quick as Noob Sidebot.
Yep, I heard that.
Or Smoke, or whatever. I can't think of any other Mortal Kombat characters that are just wearing black. Wow, the lighting here. He was fucking horrible. Okay. Yeah, I thought that was a cool speech. I think it addressed a lot of the issues that I wanted to hear, but this kind of concludes the preordained portion of the round, right? Like, the affirmative knew that the negative reads this K, so here was the affirmative, there was the negative, and then here was the K responses from the affirmative. This next speech is going to determine basically whether the affirmative responses were well thought out or whether they weren't well thought out. And it being LD, this is the last speech from the negative. There's a lot that I want to see established here. And when it comes to me personally as a critic, there is maybe more that I want to see established here than I would normally see. Then not even that I would normally see. Then that might be required from some other judges. So let's give it a shot. Let's give Cybot a chance to prep. But yeah, I'm very impressed. These are very good debaters. I'm sure that they did not continue to do debate in college, and if they did, that they would have whooped some ass. Yeah, this is a really awesome level of competition that I haven't really
Starting on the advantage page and then the frame.
seen so far
The K is probably going to start with an
in our
overview.
videos.
I'd flow wherever you really want.
Is the overview like page worthy?
No.
I'm sorry, repeat the order one more time.
K with an overview, then line by line, and then the advantage page.
Line by line what? K with an overview. Line by line of what? The F?
K with an overview, then line by line, and then the advantage page and the framing page.
Okay, so maybe it's just an overview of the K, then a line by line of the K, then advantage and framing.
So, oh, bless you.
Thank you.
So I'm not burning my neck for 6 minutes straight.
We're very polite boys. I like to imagine that they're friends. I hope so. It's been long enough. I'm friends with many of the former debate rivals that I once had. I say that in plural. There was
Okay,
one.
everyone ready?
His name is Mike.
Yep.
We're cool now. We were cool then.
Despite the one-year sounding good, it was not as technically proficient as I would hold Bennett to. He has conceded multiple reasons independently why we would solve all of his offense arguments on the case flow, which is going to be a reason to lose the debate now. On the question of the critique is an overview argument. Our argument is that ultimately, no matter how liberal you are, there's always a deviant you want to be. This is a uniqueness question indicates that no matter how the state form functions, no matter how liberal Bennett thinks he is, no matter how much he talks about black people, there's always going to be the queer black, the disabled black, the queer disabled black. All of these arguments will be excluded outside of deviancy. No matter how liberal your statehood gets, there's always going to be a rewriting of history. For example, Giroux is progressive for now, but in 100 years, you'll ask yourself, was Giroux really progressive? The argument is probably not. The argument is ultimately that you should affirm the idea of deviance, the queer suicide bomber. Our argument is a methodological analysis that is a good heuristic, just as all his state arguments are. He says the state is heuristic. We say the queer suicide bomber is a good heuristic for understanding the world, which means that it now takes out all of his Trayvon Martin arguments. Yes, it may be true that a specific incident was bad, but we think an understanding generalized form of violence is probably best. Now on the line by line. He said, link our specific convention to vote affirmative and give him leeway on this question. 2 in our articulation is key. We need to be able to respond to the contestation of our arguments. Obviously, we are not going to spend a bunch of time contextualizing the entire app because the 2 in our, the 1 in NC link evidence has specific arguments to the affirmative. Now, on the assuming evidence proper, the focus on embodied experiments ultimately produces liberal individuals. Our assuming evidence indicates the idea of structures of expression are not something that we can control. For example, culture. Culture ultimately exceeds our ability to control it. For example, do you think the founding fathers that thought America would be a place where I was in the middle of a debate tournament talking about queer suicide bomber? Goddamn hell no! But ultimately, we were able to change that and flow culture through a different methodology. The idea that culture exceeds our attempt to control is exactly what the uniqueness claim that I'm assuming evidence indicates, which is linked to all of his arguments about being able to change anything. If I'm winning my assuming evidence, you should vote negative on presumption functionally because there is no obvious you cannot control culture, you cannot control gun culture, you have done nothing to explain the solvency mechanism of the affirmative, which means that we're probably ahead of this. But I'm assuming evidence also links directly to the idea of radical democracy, drawing into radical democracy that indicates we should have a kind of conduit space or space where we embody moral experience. For example, where we talk about discursive action of gun control, which is exactly what his framing argument of the policy making right at the flow indicates, is exactly what I'm assuming evidence critiques. Ultimately, there is no such thing as personal experience. There's only collective experience in the entirety of our framing right now.
Okay, I don't like the we can't control culture argument Because as the negative is correctly mentioning, then that the only grounds that leaves for a negative vote is presumption, right? Like, the negative is coming in and be like, yo, let's change our culture in these ways, and the app's like, nah, let's do this thing instead, and now the negative is being like, look, we don't know that we can change culture, right? So let's just assume we can't, and that will mean a vote for the negative. I don't buy that there's no way to change culture. I'm sure there's going to be some answers, and I'm sure that if I was flowing, there was a bunch of shit that the affirmative said that indicated there probably is a way to change culture. But, like, I mean, what do you mean? Culture's changed all the time. Like, I don't know, like, fucking, I pick a name. Tom Cruise changed culture, and he's a fucking psychopath. I don't know. Many people changed culture. The comedian Norm Macdonald changed culture. He coined the term fake news. Like, what do you mean? Like, what? We can't change culture. Maybe we can't change culture in a totally predictable way. But I don't know why that gives reason to prefer the negative except through presumption. But I don't know. I feel like that's kind of weak when that same logic is used as the premise behind the negative K's solvency.
The evidence. Big concession, you're going to lose. Sorry to end your career. The liberals of subject formation is predicated on the imperative of upholding peaceful order. Ultimately, exploiting maldeviance. Our evidence is extremely specific. You can read it. It indicates that ultimately the lines of deviance which we compare everything either reflexively to the white human subject so it causes two impacts. Either we compare everything reflexively to the white human subject and assimilate it, or completely destroy it, because liberal subjectivity is based on an ideal signifier. It also indicates that forms of war, militarism...
First of all, like, look, I'm not very smart, but I'm also not that dumb. And at the point where I don't know what the fuck you're saying, then that probably indicates your evidence is not that specific, right? Like, I hear the words you're saying, and I understand the words individually, but at the point where I don't understand what they specifically are referring to in this context, probably indicates that you're being vague. And the specificity then does not mean that it's a reason to prefer the negative.
All those kinds of things are mobilized along lines of deviancy. Why are we killing brown people in the Middle East? Because they're deviant.
I guess, like, yeah, I guess we are killing brown people in the Middle East because they're deviant. Not sure how the next solves for that.
Now on the line by line of his cross allocations. He says to Brander answer all of our arguments because he used guns to prevent people from being able to, because guns construct a national identity. What does not answer the question of why national identities are even constructed or how guns are formulated as deep. I'm assuming you haven't specifically this question indicate the entire idea, and we control the direction, the way in which identity is actually formulated. Now, on the Richie 15, you say master narrative failed. It only takes out the whole nationalism. They said the card is not specific to queer suicide bombing. It's really generic and probably not that good. It just says that.
The card's not specific to queer suicide bombers. Is something that I feel like could be applied to every card ever written about about banning handguns. Like, is there a card that says banning handguns and queer suicide bombers?
Idea of homo nationalism is too over-encompassing. That's why we read Masumi as well, because it indicates that this is a Deleuzian theory, not a Poirian theory, which we just read an alternative on queer suicide bomber, and that doesn't even die. That card is awful now. He says identities overdetermine the myth for black people. What are both ballot extension? We'll get to it in a second. The methodology frame is good.
Like, are your queer suicider bomb, Jesus. Are your queer suicider cards, suicider, that's even not suicide bomber cards specific to banning handguns. I don't know. I just feel like it's a weird standard to now introduce.
This is a Delusian theory, not a Poirian theory, which we just read an alternative on queer suicide bomber, and that doesn't even die that. His card is awful now. He says that Denny's overdetermined the myth for black people. What are roll the ballot extension? We'll get to in a second. The methodology frame is good in this question. I already did about the question methods analysis. This is the same thing we said. Using the state as a heuristic that I've already said above too. Trayvon violence was irrational. That's the entirety of our argument. Ultimately, there is no reason Joseph decided to follow him that night, but ultimately, the negative is a good way to understand the irrationality of violence now. On be skeptical of multiple permutations. A, the action enables them to multiple different advocacy go before the two ARs make the two AR attacking a moving target because they can pick which one they want to go for. Probably reason to drop permutations. Now, all the permutations.
Permutation is not a moving target. I'm just not going to go over that. I mean, it's just not, right? Like, the permutation is a test of competition. It's a test of whether the critique or the counterplan or whatever legitimately shows a reason to reject the affirmative. Them later coming up and showing that your arguments to reject the affirmative don't actually necessitate a reason to reject the affirmative does not sever from the original affirmative advocacy. So, I don't personally buy that.
It doesn't solve, it still links to the idea of accountability. The permutation do both argument ultimately reifies political subjectivity, exactly the kind of argument we talk about where you can pick and choose when you want to do things. This is exactly a disad. The reason why the permutation doesn't solve now, the permutation do the all other instances use the state once it's sufficient to turn all their impacts. Our evidence, assuming evidence that the use of state is always going to cause violence. If it is truly a try or die or even risk of the affirmative, that means that the permutation do the all other instances would at least enact some form of...
This is where a lot of the, This is where the state is inevitable arguments would really come in handy. But the argument here is that you can't perm, you can't whatever, because even just the implication that you use the state in any way means that you can't solve, because no method of ever using the state ever leads to any success. Which I feel like maybe could have been answered better by the affirmative, but I don't know. I feel like there's a bunch of arguments in the 1AC that are like, here's why this state is helpful. I don't know. Ultimately, it feels lazy, right? It feels like an answer to the perm that is just like, whoa, you can't pick an easy answer to my K. You need a difficult answer to my K. But I don't understand why that is, right? Like, I don't know. Like, if you're whatever. I'll get to this in the end. But ultimately, the question that I want to understand is, what does doing the K look like? Who does it? And how does it solve? And if what you are saying is that the K cannot solve in a scenario in which the state does something, even if that thing is in support of the same thing that the K is trying to accomplish, then I just do not believe that the K has solvency, right? Like, say the K is trying to create a, whatever, like, queer suicide bomber state. And let's say, hypothetically, at the same time, for totally disparate reasons, while this movement is going on to create a queer suicide bomber type solution, some moron in the Senate is like, you know what, let's do some stuff that is really similar to what this movement is trying to do. And then it would require me to believe that the state trying to do complementary behavior at the same time that this radical individualist behavior is happening sabotages and ruins the individualist movement in some way. And that, to me, indicates that that movement probably did not have a lot of solvency, because the state trying to do anything at any point ruins their solvency, right? Like, let's make a specific example. Let's say the example that we're using is, I don't know, workers' rights with, I don't know, Amazon. let's say we're talking about a radical and more individualist solution where people just stop applying to work at Amazon, and they're like, you know what, like, we're not going to do this because you do gross things to the rights of individuals, especially minorities. Let's say the affirmative is talking about, hey, you need to allow your employees to unionize. What I would have to believe is that the legal permission to unionize somehow ruins the possibility of individuals to have this movement, and I just don't believe that, right? Like I just don't believe that is the short version. And this speaks to a problem that I have with a lot of critiques, which is just that I just don't believe doing the AF precludes the ability to do the negative, or at least like hurts the solvency of the negative.
Violence now, and permutation says white people should still fighting law. This is severance. The condition advocacy was specific to function to an idea of breaking down gun culture. This is functionally a floating counterplan. You should not evaluate it. He says flux destroys equality. All of our arguments about why flux is key to equality have been answered above. This is just a restated claim that about all of his other arguments. Our evidence indicates there's a question of equality for whom, which are conviviality evidence, which you can extend here as conceded. It indicates the displacing of subjectivity creates states of deviancy that are allowed to start together when we come together for understanding that. For example, Shanika Shakur, when he was in prison and realized that the Crip Nation could be a kind of founding point for resistance, is exactly the kind of conviviality we talk about, which we actually have answers all the material law arguments. Now the rule valid. He's conceded that you should vote for who methodologically gives a queer intelligibility. Fernando Evans indicates that the making of all things accountable destroys the ability for us to know things, because ultimately, when everything is transparent, there's no hope for us to be able to evaluate things in a way that allows you to be mysterized. Our argument is that unintelligibility is necessary to not cause everyone to be numbers in a system where they're encoded. Now, on the case debate, we're going to start on my
These
overview.
breakdowns, the stop, slow, stop, go parts, as Paul will call them, aren't really all that clear. Like, what? What are you saying? Someone about Tupac? Like, I understand what you're saying, but you're not focusing on the parts that resolve the clash.
On the statement debate. Again, another reason why you should not hack for Bennett. He has conceded the first argument that we offer an alternative to the state is inevitable or deviancy. Allah faces inevitable queerness, and second, or queer violence is irrational. In terms of all of your arguments, your answer to Stanley is god-awful. You just say that if the competing evidence for Donahue evidence, we resolve the argument that is not resolve the question of Stanley. It indicates ultimately queer violence is metaphysical because of the way in which a stab wound for the queer is not a stab wound for just that queer, but all queer life is a question of the modalities of life itself and the forms of life that we try to kill. That is completely conceded now on the abstraction debate. He just does a big overview without answering any of my arguments. He can see the second there's no way we control the uniquest question in the world. It is abstract, not us. He said that the world is ultimately terrible. There's no warrant for this claim. Our argument is that ultimately the idea of Trayvon Martin, the example he uses, is exactly the reason why it's not material. Learning the strategic abstraction is good. He has no reason why the neg-specific use of abstraction is bad. Especially when it's a methodology. You should start the methodology framing and do not let the 2AR get up and do a dance, spin, hot and toot, and win.
Alright.
I saw earlier that this was a 2-1 decision. I didn't see who it was in favor of.
Sorry about that.
It's gotta be awkward when the entire room is waiting for you to go to the bathroom. It's a lot of work. What do you think? 20 seconds?
Probably.
Oh, you
Actual
flow
stats.
horizontally? Like,
That's
you're
like-
better than that.
So you studied.
Okay, maybe you flow.
I'm not the one in the game.
What do you study then?
Social studies. It's like politics, philosophy, economics.
Because Harvard has like, what do they call them? They don't call them majors, right?
Concentrations. It's like
Concentrations.
most debaters do social studies.
Or do
Yeah,
anthropologies.
debaters are very cool and they study cool shit at Ivy League schools. Well, can we get to the next?
So it took you that long to walk
Yeah, because
there
I got to the
walk back?
pool and I was like, you know what? I should just go back.
Alright, case, the advantage framework, the perm, well, like, the K page will be sort of weird. It will be like all the permutation, but it will include parts of the other arguments. It might be easiest to just roll it top down and match everything up.
How I do anyway.
Alright,
Starting where?
the advantage.
Yeah.
Is everybody good idea? Or is everybody good?
What did you say?
I said, is everybody a good idea?
I know,
It's like on the
Yeah,
document. Alright, is everybody good?
The F is a good idea. The alt maybe too, but they've conceded specific instances of violence. The alt has nothing. Our training example proves, which justifies the permutation. Gun violence is disproportionately occurred to black people, and handgun bans stop that because people no longer have guns to kill each other, and we reject the universal subject that reads that guns create, which is our common evidence and Donahue evidence. Your must-me evidence, your must-me card isn't about culture. It doesn't say that we can't shift it, and we have empirical evidence that says it does result in a cultural shift, which issues your heavily after this issue. Also, it's obviously just a new self-esteem in the two you say that the overkill argument is irrational violence. Doesn't matter. We still have one that we resolve. Those still material conditions violence. It still relies on you winning the critique. The framework page. You conceded the advocacy skills. This add to your interpretation. Our heuristic is good. You say that you provide a competing heuristic, but that doesn't link to our advocacy skills. Offensive use McClure, but it indicates that policy discussion is key to understand gun control specifically, which the alternative is not talking about, which justify the permutation. And is a reason that our method is independently good, which you have fundamentally not contested, even if you have a good overarching structure of how how oppression occurs. We have one that we are key to resist spillover to solve advocacy in the real world, which is the reason that discussions of gun control are good, and framing our discussion in that context is uniquely important, which also justifies your permutation, especially in the context of the one you see common evidence, which is conceded in two speeches. The materialism debate. You say that strategic abstraction is good, and you control uniqueness. You concede our past evidence that says that yes, sometimes abstraction is good, but it is only good if it is used to resolve material conditions of violence in both specific and holistic instances, which is again the thesis of our permutation argument. Yes, you have a good overarching structure claim, but you do not have a way to resolve specific instances of violence, which is what the plan does, which means that we still get access to all of our arguments. You've also seen our cross application of the code evidence that your metaphysical ontology arguments or whatever do not do anything because real novelist things like holistic militarization, which in case solves the critique.
Starting on this like perms bad argument. This is stupid. Okay.
No, it's not conditionalities. Key test vague alternatives like this one where it doesn't mean anything until 2NR, especially given that you say things like you get new 2NR applications of the link, which means that we should get multiple permutations, test those new applications. Also, no impact. You get a long 2NR times you saw it at a time.
Every time.
Now,
Whoa,
the permutation
what just
will
happened
go for
here?
both the all other instances permutation.
Every time this kid double clutches, when he does a, he puts the word in between, which kind of defeats the purpose of double clutch, which I think is funny. But no, good arguments against the perm. Now we're answering the reasons why the perm bad arguments are not good, which anytime the K needs to resort to perm bad arguments, not a good sign. I think the best Ks are the ones where the perm is a relink or is even like a better link into the literature, right? But here I don't know. They're just not specific enough arguments that I'm seeing. Maybe I'm not fast enough, maybe I'm not smart enough. All I can do is make a decision based on what I know and what I understand. But here it seems like a pretty good idea to do all of the stuff that the negative is saying while also banning guns. I just don't see any unique reasons to not ban guns.
You get a long 2NR times you saw it at a time you checks it back now. The permutation debate, we will go for both the all other instances permutation and the white people should put their bodies on the line. One all other instances does solve. If you say the state leads to some violence, however, arguments that we are keep solve resolve specific instances of violence, which you have conceded that blackness is an overarching structure, which is what evidence about Trayvon. Even if used as a collective strategy is effective, even if used as a collective strategy is effective to resolve material instances of violence, arguments that in specific instances the alt does nothing, which is also what our homo nationalism bad evidence is really, really good on. It says that that even if this is a good heuristic, it is still bad because queer people cannot disidentify once they reach, or cannot get out of the material conditions that they find themselves in, which means that you've not won a clear disadvantage in the permutation or reason that severs. You say that the app is about gun culture, however, that still means that white people are putting their rights on the line so that black people have the opportunity to become, so they're not literally killed in the streets, which means that we resolve 100% of your offense. You've also conceded our flux bad argument. It says that social movements cannot actually have any clear stasis point in flux because any clear stasis point in flux. You say there's one instance where it does. Argument is that even in those social movements, you will still go back on the street and get shot, which only the app solves.
Hey, good for these kids. They're both incredibly talented. And, it's a long time ago. Are they older than me now? I don't know. They were probably 17 or something when this happened, and they're probably like 22. Hey, great work on both their parts. They're very talented. And the video is about to end. Okay. I don't know. I feel like my decision here is going to be very boring and predictable. I think, both of them are very talented. They're both very good. I didn't flow the round. But, based on my general biases and how I perceive the round, I just didn't see anything from the negative being a unique reason to reject the specific advocacy of the affirmative. I can see a world in which we ban guns and do the incredibly vague stuff that the negative is advocating for. So I would vote for the affirmative. But that's a better shot than ever before of Batman's laptop, which is of Batman. But let's see. It was a 2-1 decision. I can see it going either way because some people really like K stuff. Let's see. 2-1 for the negative. Good job. Not sure what else to say. Certainly not every LD round is I'll wait for the Are we? No, we're not back. How about now? No? That was me saying no earlier, but we're still not. What? Why is the lag so crazy? Do I do something? Has the lag been wild this whole time? How long has this been? Okay, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Alright, this seems like it's not so bad anymore. No? Better? Fixed? Fixed. Yes? Fixed. Okay. Well, we lost it for a second, but okay, great. By golly, are these students talented? And that's certainly a higher level round and more intense round than you would see in pretty much any given Lincoln Douglas round. That was really good. I feel like once you get to this level, it comes to judge adaptation. Just not my kind of round. I don't know what to tell you. I just don't buy K solvency 90% of the time. And in this case, I didn't buy the competition, but I also just didn't buy like how the case solves differently. But I'm also a pretty trash judge. Maybe I'll have Paul judge this round instead, and then he can weigh in. But maybe he won't do that. And maybe if you're watching this, then I just ended up posting this one. Well, have a good one.